Hello, everyone.
Greetings. We're in Ray Franz on page 25 of Crisis of Conscience. He's talking about credentials and cause, and he's been recounting how the aid book came together and his role in bringing together some of the key subjects for further research that ended up being in the aid book. And he's also mentioned that there's some degree of mixed signals in the way Nathan Knorr seems to be thinking about this project. It seems to be fairly short and get it done fast. Fred Franz is giving off a different vibe, namely that he wants the job done right and bias is put aside. That's interesting when we get to the later developments on the governing body.
Mm-hmm.
He says on page 25, when the subject chronology was assigned to me, this similarly led to serious questions. A major teaching of Jehovah's Witnesses is that Bible prophecy had pointed to the year 1914 as the end of the Gentile times of Luke chapter 21, verse 24, and that in that year Christ Jesus actively took up his kingdom power and began to rule invisibly to human eyes. In Daniel chapter 4, references to a period of 7 times were the foundation for the calculations leading to that date, and by the use of other texts, these 7 times were translated into a period of 2,520 years, beginning in 607 BCE and ending in 1914. The starting date, 607, was held to be the time of the destruction of Jerusalem by Babylonian conqueror Nebuchadnezzar. I knew that the 607 BCE date seemed to be peculiar to our publications, but did not really know why. Months of research were spent on this one subject of chronology, and it resulted in the longest article in the aid publication. I didn't realize that at the time. I was fascinated by that article, but didn't realize it was the longest. Much of the time was spent endeavoring to find some proof, some backing in history for the 607 date, so crucial to our calculation for 1914. Charles Ploger, that's Ploeger, a member of the headquarters staff, was at that time serving as a secretary for me, and he searched through the libraries of the New York City area for anything that might substantiate that date historically.
We found absolutely nothing in support of 607 BCE. All historians pointed to a date 20 years later. Before preparing the aid material on archaeology, I had not realized that the number of baked clay cuneiform tablets found in the Mesopotamian area and dating back to the time of ancient Babylon numbered into the tens of thousands. In all of these, there was nothing to indicate that the period of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, in which period Nebuchadnezzar's reign figured, was of necessary length to fit our 607 BCE date for the destruction of Jerusalem. Everything pointed to a period 20 years shorter than our published chronology claimed. Though I found this disquieting, I wanted to believe that our chronology was right, in spite of all the contrary evidence. Well, that's important, I think. I wanted to believe that our chronology was right, in spite of all contrary evidence. Thus, in preparing the material for the aid book, much of the time and space was spent in trying to weaken the credibility of the archaeological and historical evidence that would make erroneous our 607 BCE date and give a different starting point for our calculations, and therefore an ending date different from 1914.
Charles Ploger and I made a trip to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island to interview Professor Abraham Sachs, that's S-A-C-H-S, a specialist in ancient cuneiform texts. We wanted to see if we could obtain any information that would indicate any flaw or weakness whatsoever in the astronomical data presented in many of the texts. Data that indicated our 607 date was incorrect. In the end, it became evident that it would have taken a virtual conspiracy on the part of the ancient scribes, with no conceivable motive for doing so, to misrepresent the facts, if indeed our figure was to be the right one. Again, like an attorney faced with evidence he cannot overcome, my effort was to discredit or weaken confidence in the witnesses from ancient times who presented such evidence, the evidence of historical texts relating to the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The arguments I presented were honest ones, but I know that their intent was to uphold a date for which there was no historical support. So, this is you.
So despite our heightened appreciation of certain principles, the aid book, nonetheless, contained many examples of our efforts to be loyal to the Society's teachings. In many respects, what we learned through our experience did more for us than it did for the publication. Still, the Aid to Bible Understanding book did serve to quicken interest in the Scriptures among many witnesses. Perhaps its tone, its approach, the effort put forth by most of the writers to avoid dogmatism, to acknowledge that there might be more than one way of seeing certain matters, not to make more of something than the evidence honestly allowed, these things may have been of principal benefit, though in these, too, we certainly fell short at times, allowing preconceived ideas to control, failing to hold as firmly as we should have to the Scriptures themselves. I know this was true in my own case in preparing such subjects as the appointed times of the nations, faithful and discreet slave, and great crowd, all of which contain arguments designed to uphold current teachings of the Watchtower publications. Simply because, in my mind, those teachings were then equivalent to fact. I found myself doing what the foreword I later wrote said was not intended. On page 6, under the heading, Its Aim, the words appear, Aid to Bible Understanding is not intended to be a doctrinal commentary or an interpretive work. Also, that whatever application was made of figurative and symbolic expressions, this was not done arbitrarily or to conform to a creed. In the main, that was true, but ingrained beliefs sometimes overrode our efforts to hold to that standard. Yeah.
It's very obvious that Raid was responsible for some of the major articles, ones that fascinated me, but main articles like Great Crowd and Faithful and Discreet Slave.
But the honesty of being influenced by confirmation bias, all of us are guilty of that to some extent, but it became more obvious to him, it seems, over time, that that's what he had done.
Yeah, I've never done a check of this, but I presume, I have to assume, that most of these articles are intact in the
new one,
inside in the Scriptures, yeah. And therefore, he's getting no credit. But to rewrite all the articles would have been impossible, I think, in the 1980s. Anyway, he goes on. Now there's something else that changes. He's going to become a part of the governing body now. The year of the completed aid book, that's 1971, I was invited to become a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, the body that now directs the activity of Jehovah's Witnesses in some 205 countries of the world. Up to that point, it had been composed of 7 members who were identical with the 7 members of the board of directors of the corporation called the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, a corporation founded originally in Pennsylvania by Charles Taze Russell, the first president. On October 20th, 1971, along with 3 others, I was appointed as a member of the now expanded governing body. This circumstance, perhaps more than any other, brought me face to face with some realities that I'd never expected to encounter. Many of Jehovah's Witnesses took exception to a statement that appeared in a Time magazine article, February 22, 1982, in which my name figured prominently. The writers of the article referred to the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses as secretive, It may seem odd to use a term like that about an organization that encourages vigorously a work of the most public kind, house-to-house activity, in cities, towns, and countryside around the world. The Time reporters evidently wrote what they did because they found it extremely difficult to obtain any comment from the international headquarters about the situation described in the first chapter of this book.
But the fact is that even among Jehovah's Witnesses, very few have any clear idea as to how the central part of the organization functions. They do not know how decisions as to doctrinal teachings are reached, how the governing body that directs all their activities worldwide conducts its discussions, whether decisions are consistently unanimous, or what is done if there is disagreement. All this is cloaked in secrecy as the governing body meets in closed sessions. I can only recall 2 or 3 occasions in the 9 years that I was part of the body when persons other than appointed members were allowed to be present at a regular session of the body. And on those occasions their presence was simply to give a report requested by the governing body, after which they were dismissed, and the governing body then carried on its deliberations in private. The importance of their reports did not qualify those persons to share in the discussion. Also, no specific information is ever given to witnesses as a whole as to the society's income, expenditures, assets, or investments, although they have received a brief expense report in the annual yearbook. Thus, numerous factors that are relatively common knowledge in many religious organizations are known only vaguely, if at all, by the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses. Yet the decisions made by the small group of men forming the body can, and often do, affect lives in the most intimate way, and are supposed to be applied globally. Which brings me to the final reason for writing, the most important, since without it, the previous ones are of little consequence.
Then he has the one-word heading for the next section, obligation. We'll take that up next time. Good link for this particular section, though, is our research. I did a lot of research in the 5 or so years after I left the Watchtower into whether there was any. I had read this book already, so I kind of knew what Ray had said about there being no evidence when he and Charles Ploger did their job. I wanted to find out for myself and then write a tract that would show just how completely without substance this claim that 607 is the date of Jerusalem's fall is. So I did, and the results are in this tract called 607 Witnesses Against the Watchtower. So we'll put that link on your screen, along with the playlist on 1914 and the Gentile Times. See you next time.